So I'm going to use an example. The United States, the bird of the United States is the eagle. So eagles by nature are not predators. Eagles by nature are opportunistic. So that if the bear is eating the salmon and drops the salmon, the eagle is going to go grab it. The eagle is not going to fight the bear. It's just going to wait till the fish drops and goes and grabs it. To me, the United States is a lot like that. The United States is built off of an opportunistic nature. And we don't necessarily take anything. We just wait for it to fall, and then we go snatch it. But in a balanced ecosystem, you need the eagle, and you need the bear, and you need the fish. What I think about our city, my hometown, is that we don't have a balanced ecosystem, so that there's not enough equity so that everyone can thrive. I grew up, my grandparents lived at 681 Edith Avenue in the 38126. My grandfather had a third-grade education, but he took 5 children and put them all through college, and his wife, as he lived next door to the in-laws of the judge and the communications commissioner and the pastor. Across the street was Booker T and the MGs. Down the street were, you talk about doctors, lawyers, and industry. We all were in the same community, and we all thrived because the ecosystem made it possible for the eagle, the bear, and the fish. However, desegregation threw off the ecosystem. And so what happens now is that you have an imbalance so that everybody doesn't get the access that they need to each thrive and do well. So that we have black leadership, but there's still no equity in the system. So that you have the image of equity, but you have no underpinning that makes equity possible. So the bear is there, looks fine, doing what bears do. The eagle is, but we have too many eagles in the ecosystem. There are too many eagles looking for opportunities, and there are not enough fish. There's not enough resource so that everyone can thrive. To me, I'm not mad at the eagle. I'm not mad at the bear. I'm not mad at downtown Memphis. I'm not mad at Broad Avenue. I'm not mad at these neighborhoods and communities that thrive and flourish. I also know that the eagle can only take what gets dropped, so that if my neighborhood, my community doesn't maintain itself, then someone is going to. I live in Whitehaven now. I'm in the 38116. I lived in the 38106 and thought everything was in 10 minutes from where I go. I'm in Whitehaven now, and it feels like I live millions of miles from everything that I know and love. But what I know about Whitehaven is that it is believed and confirmed that the greatest amount of black disposable income is in Whitehaven, right? But every day somebody's calling to try to figure out how to get my daddy's home that I now have in Whitehaven. Right? Because as the turn in communities happens, then the ecosystem gets thrown off. This is what I say to my folks when we talk about gentrification. I'll be through, Tammy. Is that you can't gentrify what is not there to be snatched. So if I hold on to my property, now you can argue with me, I know people, and you're right, there are all kinds of systems in place that throw it off, but if grandmama leaves the house, and you don't want the house, and you don't pay the taxes on the house, and the house gets on the land bank, then the eagle is going to come and take that house, and they're going to take every other house around and build a townhouse. But it's because the ecosystem is off. There's nothing wrong. The eagle is only doing what eagles do. There's nothing wrong with that. But the bear, there has to be balance in it. So what I would like in terms of class, because I went to Booker, Washington. I lived in the 38126. But to be honest, I could argue that I was probably, I grew up in houses. I didn't grow up in subsidized housing. And every house I lived in, everybody that I lived in owned their houses. Right? I've never lived in rental property. I've never lived in an apartment. I lived with educated people. Everybody around me went to college. I could be considered that person who looks down at other people. But I went to school intentionally. my folks, my age group, I'm 55, and my age group, my classmates were all, because of desegregation, going to Central, right? Because now we could go. So when my mother put me at Booker T. Washington High School, her classmates asked her, why would she do that? Why was she putting a disadvantage on me? And my mother's comment was that I want her to learn how to walk with kings nor lose the common touch. She needs to know how to walk with the folks important and the folks who don't know they're yet important, right? But because I went to that school, I have classmates that knew that I lived in a different place and they thought differently of me. They thought I thought differently of them. The ecosystem in Memphis is off. We don't need to get rid of anybody. We don't need to dispose anybody. We don't need anybody to think more. We need a balanced ecosystem. We need to maintain so that everyone has the same opportunities so that the class issue and the race issue dial down when I can get the fish that I need as a bear, and I can make sure that the eagle has what they need, don't have to try to take my fish, and that there is enough resource in the system so everybody gets fed. That's my thought on plastic.
Thank you. We have, are there any audience questions for the panel? Tracking. Oh, yes.
I'm really interested in what you mentioned about making landmarks for these places that are so important to Memphis history that a lot of people don't know about. How do we go about doing that, recognizing these places, getting plaques made? How can we build a more complete story of why Memphis is so awesome and make sure that other people who are here and come from abroad, how do we broaden that on an official level and build upon what you've done with your tours and things like that?
So there's a Shelby County and Memphis Historical Commission, which I met last week, and let me say, it does not look like this room. And we were appointing a new Shelby County historian, and my question to the applicants was, how are you going to tell a diverse story, right? And so it's kind of a bit to Roz's point, how do we make sure we're at the tables that we need to be at? But we also have to find that information out because it's not readily available to us. The Shelby County Historical Commission feeds into the Tennessee Historical Commission, which is responsible for the protection of antebellum slave civil war history being protected. And if anybody was in Athens, Tennessee with us, the majority of that commission is white men from Middle and Eastern Tennessee who do not want the stories changed. But there is so much power in our numbers, petitions, going to the Historical Commission. I live on Forest Street. It's really ironic. I do. And also, I'm a part of a committee. Forest runs from Broad Avenue all the way downtown. And so we now have a committee to drop the R. And we raised a little bit of money, and we turned in our petition, and hopefully we'll get new signs. But to the point about class, there's a barrier because if you get the change, the people who file the petition are supposed to pay for the sign changes. But that street was originally Forest with one R. The double R was added, right? So we've argued we should not pay for anything, put it back to what it was. But if they come back and say it has to be, you have to pay for it for the change to happen, the people on Forest have the resources to pay for it. The people on Stonewall have the resources to pay for it. But what about when Stonewall curves into North Memphis and things like that, and people don't have the disposable income to change it? So it's all about continuing and building on that work. There should be a movement for Robert Church sign, right? And so that's the work, like when you hear things like this, this is gonna lead into the next question, but like what are you gonna leave here and go do? And there's so many things that we can do to make our history more accurate. Do you wanna jump in?
Yes, I do. You know, it's up to us to identify these locations. And when we started our tour company back in 1983, there were very few identifiable locations that relate to African American history. So through our research, we were able to identify many of these. We identified the Mississippi Walker People's Grocery Store, and that was a teacher at Southwest Tennessee Community College who actually applied for that historical marker, and it was granted. But we had identified and we interviewed a lot of the older people in the community who knew the story, who wrote about the stories, and identified the location. So therefore, we knew where that marker should be placed. The same way with the Ida B. Wells marker on Beale Street, we identified that location through research and interviewing older people in the community. And then we were instrumental in getting that marker placed down on Beale Street for Ida B. Wells. As far as Robert R. Church Sr., there, of course, the park is on Beale Street. There's a bust of Robert R. Church in that park now. Originally, when that auditorium was demolished, the city council promised to rebuild the auditorium. So that was back in the 1950s, and somehow they haven't found the money to build it. And there was a lot of controversy about whether they would even put those pillars there to represent it. The way that that bust was placed there, Miss Roberta Church paid for that bust to be placed there herself. So I was there when that was unveiled. Miss Roberta Church, that's Robert Church Jr.'s daughter, also was instrumental in getting the historical marker for the Solvent Savings Bank. That's right next to it. Well, it was across the street where the bank, at the bank's original location. She was instrumental in getting that marker placed there. So it takes some really research, and it takes some perseverance. Sometimes it takes our own money to get it done, as Miss Roberta Church did, because there was nothing about her grandfather about as far as his contributions to the city of Memphis. There are historical plaques right at Church Park for him, but as far as so that's how that came to be. As far as the house, of course, as Tammy mentioned, the house was burned down for a new experiment for a new fire extinguisher. Miss Roberta Church sent me a picture. I have a picture of the house in flames. It was on the front page of the Commercial Appeal. So that was a big event in the city of Memphis when they burned down Robert Church's home. After the city, by way of Crump, took away all of the Church family properties. There was another house right behind Clayborn Temple here that belonged to Robert Church. It was demolished about 15 years ago. So, of course, he owned over 300 pieces of property throughout the city. And then, of course, with him saving the city after the yellow fever epidemic, all of that. So everybody, every school child in Memphis needs to know about Robert Church, because this city might not even be here had it not been for that. So at any rate, we have, right at Slave Haven, Underground Railroad Museum, that research was done by a professor out at the University of Memphis, and he did the research along with his students, and he got that marker placed there. And of course, the marker for Nathan Bedford Forest was placed there in the 1960s on the corner of B.B. King, 3rd Street, and Adams. Of course, the Confederates did that, and that said Forrest's early home. And then it went on to say his business enterprises made him wealthy, which was selling slaves. And of course, the professor out at Rose College, along with his students, were able to get another historical marker placed there that told the true history of Nathan Bedford Forest. So they had to do the research, and they placed the historical marker there. Now, I was on the Shelby County Historical Commission for over 10 years. And so I know the kind of material that came through the Shelby County Historical Commission. There were about 3 black members of the Shelby County Historical Commission and about 15 of the white community. The chairman of the Shelby County Historical Commission was also the president of the Nathan Bedford Forest Society. And so at one meeting, we had flyers passed around inviting us to come to the Nathan Bedford Forest Ball. So that's the kind of thing that went on at the Shelby County Historical Commission. I was there, so I got despondent, and so I excused myself from that commission. But yes, there are obstacles on the Shelby County Historical Commission, and as well as on the Tennessee Historical Commission. But we have to persevere and tell our story and identify these locations. We've identified many locations over these last 35 years, and there are many more that need to be identified, and then as well as have historical markers there. And so that's something that still needs to be done, and it's our job to do it.
Thank you.
One thing when we're talking about race and class, you've probably heard a lot about MWBE, Minority Women Business Enterprise spending that the city and the county engage in. At one point was about 1% of the receipts that the city and also the county spent went to minority or women-owned businesses. When I was elected into office, I received the first report from the first quarter of fiscal year 19, and we were still only spending 1% of our dollars as a county with minority or women-owned businesses. So I got on board, we had spent $25 million with businesses in the first quarter. And of that $25 million, only 1% went to a minority or women-owned business. And so one thing that we can leave here and do is be intentional in our own personal spending, not segregating ourselves and saying, I love Bluff City Soap, which I do, but I also love Bubble Bistro, right? And because I am a black woman, I play in both worlds, and I know where black businesses are, and I know where white-owned businesses are. And so encouraging us to spend in more places than we're comfortable in. I love Chipotle, right? Anybody who knows me knows if I've had a rough day, I'm probably ending it at Chipotle. But there are tons of traditional Latinx-owned entrepreneurs who are selling good food. And I should be pushing myself to go get my burritos, not at Chipotle. And so I make that point to say, we would like to thank Top of the Line Catering for providing the food and beverages today. And Ms. Sharon Kursky, black woman, so you've got your intersection there of the ownership. And we've been intentional in making sure that when we cater this event, just like last time, that we are living as we want to model for all of us. So we are going to go into our final question, and the way we're going to do this is you'll have, if you can, as we say in the black church, turn to your neighbor and have a quick conversation, and then as a panel, we'll each answer the question and close out, okay? So the final question, be the change that you seek. Having held these discussions today, if a biographer wrote about you in the year 2219, if you're not good at math, that's another 200 years from now, what would you want them to say your contribution and impact to the history of Memphis in the 21st century was? 200 years from now, your name is in history books. What do you want to leave here having changed or impacted? Turn to your closest neighbor. We'll about 2 minutes talk, and then we'll come back. And burritos aren't real Mexican food.